My name is Monica Twinar, and on behalf of the Center for Sustainable Global Enterprise at Cornell University's S.C. Johnson College of Business, I'd like to welcome you to the 7th Annual Cornell Business Impact Symposium. For nearly 2 decades, the Center has been conducting applied research and teaching on the growth opportunities companies pursue through competitive strategies that address the world's most pressing social and environmental challenges. We offer a number of programs, events, and activities for residential students, and we are pleased to be launching an online sustainability curriculum through eCornell for the general public in the coming months. We are excited to partner with eCornell to host this online symposium, which is only possible because of the hard work of a number of people who deserve recognition. First, thank you to my center colleague, Sophia Abdulhamid, for all her efforts that make this possible each year. Also, thanks to the students from the 6 graduate and undergraduate clubs that collaborate with the center to organize CBIS. Finally, I especially want to thank Natalie Gonzalez, Morgan Phillips, and Steph Canto with the Sustainable Global Enterprise Club, who worked so hard to conceptualize tonight's panel and made it a reality. It has been a pleasure working with them. Tonight's panel, Bold Moves, Turning Sustainability Commitments into Action, is our 5th panel in the symposium. Tomorrow is our last panel about fintech and increasing global accessibility to financial services. I hope you will join us. With that, I want to turn it over to Morgan, who will introduce tonight's session.
Thank you all for joining us today, and a special thank you to you, Monica, and the whole Center for SGE team, as well as everyone at eCornell for putting this together. Like Monica said, I'm Morgan Phillips. I'm a Cornell Johnson MBA student, class of 2023, and one of the student organizers for today's panel, as well as the Vice President of Education for the Sustainable Global Enterprise Club. The SGE Club provides resources, support, and guidance to graduate students interested in pursuing careers at the intersection of business and sustainability. The club also serves as Cornell's graduate school net impact chapter. Over the past few years, companies across a variety of industries have come forward with decisive sustainability commitments. Today, we'll be joined by panelists from some of the world's largest and most innovative companies with consequential consumer impact to discuss their bold sustainability goals. We'll also go deeper than that into how they've begun to implement those initiatives to make meaningful progress and the challenge of turning commitments into actions. I'd now like to introduce our moderator, Glenn Dowell. He's been teaching on sustainability in business since 2009 and now serves as the Associate Dean of Academic Affairs at the Johnson Graduate School of Management. Glenn, over to you.
Thanks, Morgan. And thanks everyone who's joining us, and thank you to you and Monica and the entire organizing group. It is great to be here. I've been involved with CBIS in this moderating capacity for many years, and I really enjoy the discussion and the chance to learn from panelists. And I'm really excited about tonight's panel. I think you've assembled, I got nothing to do with it. I'm just here. You assembled a really great group of people to discuss these issues, and it's a critical moment in history to do this. And we see companies that have made a lot of statements about their commitments, and now the question is, how are they going to get there? And so I'm really looking forward to hearing from people who are on the ground working on this and moderating the discussion. So without further ado, I'd like the panelists to introduce themselves. And if we start, we'll go with Paula, Laura, and then Dallas, please.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Paula Alexander, and I'm Senior Director of Sustainability in our Clorox Company Sustainability Center. I've been at Clorox and Burt's Bees now about 16 years. I started my career as a brand marketer, but have really been looking after sustainability for about the last 10. And at the beginning of COVID, I expanded my role from Burt's Bees to lead the commercial team within our sustainability center. So really thinking about how do we integrate sustainability as intimately into every business and brand at Clorox as we have done at Burt's Bees. It's good to be joining you all tonight.
Great, thank you. Laura?
Hi, everyone. Laura Schaefer. I am coming to you from Salt Lake City, Utah. I recently joined Orvis as the Vice President of Conservation and Sustainability. I'm about a month and a week in there. And prior to Orvis, I was at Powder Adventure Lifestyle Company, which runs a number of ski areas and action sports camps across North America, heading up their Play Forever work, which was the commitment to protect the environment and support the communities that our business units were in. And I also have had the good fortune to work on sustainability at Mountain Hardwear, the outdoor apparel and equipment brand. I am a Johnson SGE grad from 2011, had the good fortune of taking courses from Glenn and very excited to reconnect with him tonight. And I am also on the board of directors of Protect Our Winters, which is an organization that is bringing groups together to really raise awareness about climate change and do what we can to make sure that we keep the snow falling. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Laura. Dallas?
Hey everyone, I'm Dallas Tevin. I'm coming to you from the Twin Cities of Minnesota, and I'm in corporate sustainability with Ecolab. I'm a senior marketing manager. I've been with Ecolab and a legacy company called Nalco Water now for 22 years. And so I really started out in the field helping our customers with engineering solutions and sales and, doing some of the things we'll talk about, I think, throughout the conversation today around how we help our customers conserve water and energy usage. Later on, I got into marketing, and I've been in a corporate sustainability role for the last few years. And I work across our enterprise, really looking at the ways that within our own operation, we can reduce water, energy usage, resource efficiency, that kind of thing. But then also looking at how do we apply that to the customers we serve. And so it's kind of an interesting way that we look at that. But I'm really excited about this conversation today. And thank you for having me.
Great. So as I said, this is a great panel for all the things that the students have planted in our heads to talk about. I want to start, again, this is about, to me, from talk to action. But let's start with the talk part. When you think about setting goals and communicating them, I guess if you could just talk a little bit about how your company goes about thinking about setting goals, revisiting the goals, updating the goals, and if you want to do that by thinking about a specific initiative, that's great too. If that's a little bit too amorphous to think about it overall. Paula, do you want to start with some experiences you have in this?
Absolutely. So I'll share it from two perspectives. So as the Clorox company, we set long-term sustainability, or call them ESG goals, across a long-term time horizon. We establish our most recent ones as part of our 2030 Ignite strategy. And the process involved with that is really spanning the organization and thinking about what will we include in these goals. We include in them environmental, social, and governance goals. And the team that I sit on is really responsible for ensuring that we're integrating the activation of each of those goals into the business units, who at the end of the day are the ones who really make the majority of the goals happen. It takes a long time to, I'd say, establish these goals. I think it's first about, taking an inventory, establishing your fact base, benchmarking, and also materiality, and saying, where does our company need to make the greatest strides and improvements? And at the end of the day, that's why we set these public goals, is so that we can have both that internal and external accountability to them. I think for us, there's always this feasibility check, do the math, assess how it can impact the corporate or the brand to and then begin socializing those goals. And I'd say that the biggest change that happened for us in this goal period was, former goal periods, we were doing environmental goal setting back in the early 2000s. But in this most recent goal period, it was about saying, we may be setting some targets that we don't know how we're going to achieve them. And that left, a 100-year-old company that always delivers what it says it will, a bit uncomfortable. But these long time horizon and complex questions and issues that we need to address require some of that audaciousness. And I think that was probably the biggest change for us.
Great, thanks. Laura, thoughts about goal setting and the process?
Yeah, I'll give it. I'll give it a go from the process point of view and how we're thinking about it at Orbis, since this is really where we are right now. So, for some context, Orbis has long, deep history in doing conservation work. They've got a program established 5% to nature, where 5% of profits go to organizations that are focused on protecting and restoring land. The organization as a whole now recognizes that not only do they have a responsibility with respect to our internal sustainability work, but also externally to really influence at scale. And so right now, sort of that finds us at this very pivotal time where we are working on sort of the oversimplified for a 4-step process, right? And right now it's focused on context and learning, understanding what our priorities look like, aligning around sort of common definitions of the work that we want to do, the materiality assessment that Paula referenced, and making sure that we know where we're focused and why we're focused there. And then really defining. So the next step here is defining, what it is that we're going to work on. So establishing the framework of our priority areas. And then that's where we'll be able to identify the focus efforts that we are going to build targets against and ultimately solidify the strategic goals that we will be working toward there. After we have done that, we then shift to this embed step where we'll be integrating these actionable targets. We're going to be building the roadmap and building the tools to enable the teams to be able to get the work done. And then ultimately, the last step is really build this concept of moving from doing to being, and really establishing our conservation and sustainability work as inherent in who we are, which conservation is already, but inherent in who we are, and then really us as leaders in the hunt and fish industry and as a differentiator there. So process for us really is that context, define, embed, and then build. And that's sort of the simplified look, but since that's where we are right now, I think that might be relevant to thinking kind of the zoom out approach to the conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you. Dallas?
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo a lot of what Paula and Laura said, Glenn. Sustainability is very core and vital to our vision and our purpose at Ecolab. But sustainability is like this massive topic, right? And I'm sure you talk about it in your classes. It's like it means something different to just about anybody you talk to on the streets. So this materiality assessment is really critical, right? If you're a paper company, you're probably thinking about deforestation, right? If you're an ag company, you're probably thinking about, restorative farming practices. So like Paula and Laura mentioned, what we really had to do was, work with internal, external stakeholders and do kind of a materiality assessment. What can we impact within our own operations and with our customers? And you don't do that, in a vacuum, and it's a process and it takes a while. So our last goal setting cycle was a couple years ago. And what we did is we set some 2025 goals, some 2030 goals, and then those, hey, like what's the long game going to look like, some 2050 goals. And those are, some of those things can be subject to change, and we don't know how we're going to get to all of those, but we've got a pretty good glide path, I would say, for this next, 8 years. But that's kind of how we're looking at it. And I think there's nothing wrong with being ambitious and trying to set some aggressive targets.
How do you guys think about balancing, or how do your companies think about balancing that ambition with not overwhelming people, right? Because it gets to the point where these goals can look impossible, or people can't imagine what their jobs will look like if you actually reach these goals. How do you balance that in terms of your developing and your messaging?
Well, I'd say that setting those interim milestones. So although our business strategy, it goes through 2030 and we have ESG goals through the 2030 period, we also have some 2025 goals that may not be publicly disclosed, but we're certainly tracking them internally against them, especially in the areas of packaging, virgin material reduction, or PCR content increases, or reuse, recyclability, compostability for our packaging. Those are goals that, we are going to need those milestones, because the type of innovation that's necessary to make those things happen doesn't happen overnight. And so we have to build that pipeline of innovation to get us there. So knowing how we're tracking against 2025 and how does that look for 2030. And I'd say it's similar for us. Clorox just declared a net zero commitment last fall, but it's built on the basis of our science-based targets that go through 2030. So you assume the hard work that's going to happen to get us to 2030, but then there will be pathways to net zero from there.
Okay. You mentioned briefly, at least I think I heard in passing, that you've got some that are less public than others, right? Goals that are much more internal than others that you're more likely to put a stamp on. And I know Laura mentioned at her prior company that they were actually very reluctant to even trumpet the goals. How do you think about that balance? I mean, putting them out there brings pressure, which can help you maybe get the momentum behind a goal, but it can also put a target on your back. How do you think about that balance? Laura, since you volunteered that your prior company didn't want to be public.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so the pressure is huge, right? The incentive to, once the goal's out there, then the accountability piece is there, right? And what we had talked about at Powder is a privately owned, family-owned company run by a founder who was deeply committed to protecting the environment. He was also deeply private. And so he felt very strongly that we were not going to be a company that shouted from the rooftops about what we were working toward with respect to anything in the business, but instead we would shout from the rooftops the wins that we had. And he felt that the sort of incentivizing there was there through people really wanting to be able to accomplish the projects that they were working on, that were getting them closer to the internal goals that we set. So the piece that I would say about this that is hugely important is that we aligned our internal environmental and community goals with our standard business strategy. So tying into those 3 to 5 year goals that we had, that each of our business units were, their plan on a page that they were working toward. Each one of them had their environmental and community goals tied into those. And so it wasn't I'm sort of combining the two prior topics, but it wasn't siloed standalone work that had to happen off the corner of someone's desk. It was fully owned by, people within each business unit and within corporate, because it was incorporated into the larger business workings. And that was important, incredibly important, because we didn't have that external accountability piece. And so the way to sort of make sure the fire was always lit under us was that it was incorporated into those, bigger picture, if you will, business goals that we had.
Okay, thank you. Dallas, anything, I mean, this public versus your internal goals, is there a...
Yeah, the way I would kind of break that up, Glenn, is leading and lagging indicators. So the lagging indicators are our publicly facing goals, right? And we're fully transparent, on how we get there. We, do all kinds of, filing with the CDP and EcoVadis and you name it, right? And so we're happy to have that transparency. The leading indicators are a little bit more on the internal side, right? So an example of that might be looking at our innovation pipeline and what do we have to help get us to delivering those sustainable impacts that we want to project for our customer base. we know that we're going to need a certain pipeline to get there, right? And so that's the kind of thing we're keeping our eyes on from an internal perspective. But hopefully that kind of helps, kind of that contrast of leading and lagging.
So you've got these essentially process indicators that help you then on these outcomes that you've made public. Is that what a way to think about it? Or
yeah. I mean, we don't want to just open the books next year and go, this is where we landed, right? So yeah, we've got to have some ways to kind of predict how we're doing.
Great, thanks. So when you think about this, then you've got a series of metrics that I assume are tied. How do you think about developing metrics around these goals and not overwhelming, or not we can have sort of metric fatigue in any organization, or we can have conflicting metrics, right, where you get people sort of not sure which one to work toward. How do you think about that? What's the process for developing metrics and making sure that they're moving in the right direction? Paula?
Yeah, I'll zero in on the Burt's Bees business, which I know even better because I've been working directly on this business for a while. As Dallas said, you've got those leading indicators. We call them our quarterly KPIs, and we track them. We set them on an annual basis. They should be helping us get to those longer term goals, and then we monitor them and visit with our leadership team on a quarterly basis with asks. All of this work requires such cross-functional collaboration that for any one of those targets, we need our cross-functional leadership team engaged on the deliverables. So I'd say that's primarily how we do it at Burt's, and I think we call them our headline goals. They're the ones that I think are really meaningful for our business, but meaningful for society. So the upper right back box on the materiality assessment, and those are the ones that we really want to make sure that we're putting out there in, say, in a sustainability report. But it's those sort of quarterly tracking that ensures that we can have the success stories.
Mm-hmm. Dallas, anything to add on the metric side and thinking about?
I think it's important to have a few, right? You can't do 75 things good or average, right?
I can't do 3 things well most days. So.
I know, me too. So, I mean, I'll just tell you, for us, like Clorox and others we've set a climate goal, right? We've joined the UN ambition for the 1.5 degree C pledge. We've said, hey, look, we're putting a stake in the ground. We want to get to 50% carbon reduction by 2030, right? We've said, we want to reduce water withdrawal by 40% by 2030. We want to eliminate single-use plastics by 2030, right? And so those are some of our internal goals. I would say those are some of the big ones. There's diversity, equity, and inclusion goals as well. I think we're focused on mostly sustainability here today, but we've looked at the whole ESG spectrum. And then we've also set goals in terms of the 3 million plus customers that we serve around the globe. So we've said, hey, by 2030, we want to help conserve 300 billion gallons of water a year, equivalent to the drinking needs of 1 billion people every year for our customers. And we've set a climate target as well. And so we track that, and I put this in the link, or I think your team probably has put a couple things in the link. And we have like this interactive real-time counter that people can go to and kind of check out and see how we're doing against that. So that's something that kind of, I think, it keeps it, kind of cool and targeted to a couple different things. So you don't have this, hopefully, like fatigue of too many goals. That's what the whole, corporate sustainability report is, the deep dive. If you want to read that, go for it.
We don't all just sit around and read reporting all day long?
Right.
I assume my students do. I don't know.
Yeah. That's why I learned there.
That's right. I'm sorry. If that's what I taught you, I'm sorry. So you're in the midst of getting your feet on the ground with Orbis, and are you thinking about this issue around metrics and re-examining them, or
Yeah, I love the concept of headline goals. I think that's so fabulous, the way that that's framed up, and completely agree, with everything that Paula and Dallas said. What we did at Powder, I think a lot of this actually really goes back to the materiality work and the framework and honing in on where our priority areas are, right? And that's the work we're doing right now at Orvis. So I can speak to Powder, where we really, within our environment pillar, identified energy, waste, and water as our priority areas. And then within those, we had what I'm now going to call a headline goal for each one of those. And then we had supporting metrics, right, that we were working toward on those. And a big part of making sure that those worked for us was reporting, like making sure that the reporting was actually incorporated into how we operated in a way that it wasn't, again, like too much of an added lift for the teams. I mean, these are ski resort teams who are stretched pretty thin, right? And so, making sure that we're syncing into our monthly financial reporting with just the key metrics that we had identified within each of those areas, which were just a handful, and then quarterly on some of those bigger ones, and then that annual reporting for really sharing both kind of the headline goal stories and then all of the supporting metrics that were there. And that seemed to work really well. I think the idea of it's like you've got to figure out what you're willing to put a stake in the ground for and where you can really make a difference. And once you do that, I actually think that the goals and the metrics sort of they surface pretty quickly. I'll say actually at Powder, decision making around this was sometimes took longer than others, but actually honing in on the metrics was not too hard because we had figured out really where we were going to focus with the energy, waste, and water efforts, and then specifically within those, what was relevant for our teams. And so then it was kind of like, well, this is what matters in the world today. And so here's what we're going to be tracking.
So I don't have line of sight into how many of my current students are observing this, but for the ones that are and ones who've taken the class in the last few years, the consistent use of materiality from the three of you is either making them have PTSD or warming their hearts that the class wasn't wasted. Could you talk a little bit about bringing in external expertise and external views? I think Dallas, at least two of you mentioned it specifically, and not being sort of stuck in tunnel vision. And how do you incorporate that and really take it seriously and work well with these external parties that can really help you identify material issues? Dallas, I'm going to call on you first. I think you're the one who brought up it most clearly.
Sure. I mean, it goes back to you need to have external and internal partners to really develop these things. We brought in, consultants that do this kind of thing. We did benchmarking, and we did surveys within our internal community as well, all trying to figure out kind of what would resonate. But Glenn, I'm going to take your question a little bit further, right? Because here's the thing: setting these goals, you would think, is really tough. The tough part is executing on these goals, okay? And the tough part is taking, and I talk with our customers every day, and I'll be anxious to hear from Paul and Laura too, but I hear a lot of this. It's easy for corporations to set goals, but then it's really tough when it's like, how do these translate down to the site level? Yeah. Do you just peanut butter spread it across, all the sites, or do you do, individual assessments? How do you build that accountability? That's the hard part, right? And so when, we're looking at these, it's got to be a little bit of a top down and bottom up, right? There's got to be a little bit of collaboration there. And, at the end of the day, people have to be aligned, right? We have to make sure that, the people that are working in our manufacturing plants, we have 80 plants around the globe, that they've got some stake in this game, right? This is tied to their, personal objectives as well. So that's something that I would just, really want to kind of bring up and stress, is that a lot of organizations around the world, that's kind of what we're all trying to figure out right now.
Paula, anything to add on the external, bringing the external stakeholders in and really taking their views seriously as you do this materiality?
Yeah, we just updated our Clorox materiality assessment this year, and I thought it was a more modern approach to it. Typically you'll get 30 or so interviews. Half of them might be internal folks that you ask about the key issues. The other half might be external industry, NGOs, other retail partners. In our case, we would check in with and qualitatively. But the process we used this year actually overlaid a digital listening. So you take the key issues that may have surfaced in the qualitative, and then we went out there with a lot more data points. And I think it just kind of gave me greater confidence in our materiality assessment, that yes, we were clearly honing in on the right issues for us.
Sorry, did that identify any discrepancies? So you've been doing the focus groups, and you thought you'd had from these qualitative sessions, thought you kind of knew what was going on, and then the digital listening gave you a whole new perspective, or did it reinforce?
What it did was it may have reordered some issues. So our materiality turned up 30 some odd issues, and then we tiered them into 3 tiers. But then, from the interviews, they may have been a different order, and some things may have, clicked over into a higher tier as a result of the listening. So I thought it was a really good add-on to the process. Great.
So we have some questions coming in from our viewers, and I just I'm trying to consolidate a couple of them. And one thing that's come up in one version or another repeatedly is, what do you do when your business goals and your sustainability goals do collide? How do you reconcile that? How do you talk internally, externally about those, I'll say, inevitable kind of collisions? Laura,
I got to think.
We'll call you first, right?
I got to think on that one.
Oh, you got to think on that one?
That's the one that I want to think on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll come back to you, Paula.
Yeah, I think in the current business climate, these are colliding a lot with all our supply chain issues, supply assurance issues that we're facing. It can be really hard to get our general managers to focus on the 5 years out, the 10-year plastic reduction commitment. So I think there is just this natural tension. And I think some of it is not necessarily because they're sustainability goals, but just the short term versus long term, and some of the choices that you have to make. How do you reconcile them? I think, some of this goes back to, we talk about head, heart, guts at Clorox. And I think some of it is you have to keep, even though the current business climate can be really difficult, and the quarterly earnings call can be really difficult, reminding people what our purpose is all about at Clorox. We champion people to be well and thrive every single day. And so delivering the short term is absolutely a part of that, but also ensuring that we've got a thriving planet in the years to come, or that societies are stronger and more resilient because we're embracing diversity. That's going to ultimately make our business stronger in the long run too. So it's just continuing to remind people, and I'll often hear, it's not that I'm not committed to these, I just need the business case, right? And so that's where our team comes in and needs to help provide some of that. And it may mean going beyond your typical financial metrics.
Okay, thanks. Dallas, do you have thoughts on this collision, or this potential collision? Have you seen it play out?
A little bit. I mean, I actually kind of push back on that narrative a little bit. That sustainability equals expensive. Okay. That can be true. Okay. So I'll give you an example where, we'll maybe choose to invest a little bit more to try to achieve a certain objective. So we have plants that are in water scarce regions. And so we've made it a priority that, hey, and we're going to look at water scarce regions, and if, maybe we need to invest more to look at water reclamation, for example. And that's a capital project, and they might be expensive, and a return on investment for something like that, a payback for something like that might be a little bit further out compared to other projects that we would evaluate. But that doesn't mean that it's necessarily just expensive, and that these business needs and sustainability needs clash. And so I think it's really important. A lot of what we talk to our customers about is how do you have business and environmental goals that can happen in parallel. And so that's just, I think, a really important narrative that I would want to share with your class.
So you think it's important to reframe it and not think about this in that trade-off or expense mentality?
Absolutely.
Okay. Laura, you've had time to think.
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts now.
Okay.
And I mean, one thing I would add to that too is, it's sort of like there will be inevitable collisions, but I think it's smart to recognize that there are always collisions in business, and there's no real reason why a sustainability collision should be any different or treated any differently than any other collision that's happening. And so, I mean, what I mean by that is I think it's really important to really build this work into the system. I know I've been saying that, but really to make this be a part of regular business operations, right? And so when those collisions come along, you're working through those challenges just like you would any other business challenge. And it doesn't become environment versus bottom line versus brand equity or whatever, the current discussion may be at hand. And so I think that that's one piece that I would say is really important. I would also say that I have had a lot of luck just remembering that providing context in these conversations is often very helpful, because some might say that this work has been around for a long time. Others might say that we're on a bouldering wall and not a climbing wall right now, and we're sort of going all over the place and figuring it out as we're going. And I think that providing that context of, what others in the space are doing, what we are committed to, what our brand values are, what our aspiration is to lead, or, just helping sort of remind, this is why this is here. This is why it matters. And this is why we're having the conversation. And now let's talk about it just like we do any other challenge, has been pretty helpful in terms of trying to break through those dams sometimes.
That's great. So you did have lots of thoughts. After
I had a lot of thoughts. I got
even more,
but I'll stop now.
Yeah. So in various guises, I've heard this watching, sort of paying attention to others and an idea of benchmarking. And I'm just wondering how you think about benchmarking sort of narrowly within your industry and benchmarking leaders that may be outside your industry, or how do you look to other companies for, inspiration or maybe cautionary tales of doing things? What's your process? Dallas, trying to randomly choose who to start with.
No, I mean, I would say the cool thing about sustainability is it's like a community, right? I mean, everybody wants to help each other, and you're just like always on the same side of the table with people. So it's great to look at what other organizations are doing. You do have to almost look at it by sector. I mean, you can look at like Microsoft and, hey, they're like net zero back to 2012. And, so that's super cool, but it's, maybe not feasible for everybody, right? I look at like a Unilever, and they're doing great things as far as like, in the ESG space, right? And a lot of the organizations actually in Europe are I think, really pioneers. And there's all kinds of reporting that comes out. I mentioned the CDP earlier. There's EcoVadis. There's Dow Jones Sustainability Index, Corporate Knights. So there's ways to kind of benchmark and compare and see who's doing well. Our CSO is like, he's the most connected guy. And I would just say it's like, it is this community. Everybody's really friendly and loves to work together. And, that's kind of how I think we approach it a little bit from Ecolab's perspective.
Okay. Paula, I think thoughts on benchmarking and how you've managed that, and especially in a company with as broad a product range as Clorox.
Yeah, so I would say that it is valuable to look at your peers at the call it our enterprise level, but yes, almost category specific benchmarking is what we also need to do. Burt's Bees looks out at the natural personal care category, or more broadly the personal care category, to see where might we need to go. But I think two things here: benchmarking, going back to what happens when you're undoubtedly running into those business tensions. Some of that benchmarking never hurts, to be able to surface it and say, look at what our peers are doing, or look at the goals that they have just set or announced. So it can be valuable, but at the same time, it feels like those announcements are coming out every month these days, or at least they certainly were in 2021. And we took the perspective that, we need to control our own narrative. Where are we? What's the uniqueness in terms of our portfolio and where we're committed to making a difference? And let's make sure we don't take our eye off the ball. Great.
So I'm going to put you on the spot for a further second, Paula. And so Burt's Bees was an acquisition, right, by Clorox. Mm-hmm. How has Clorox broadly learned from what Burt's Bees was already doing? Has that been a conduit for broader conversations within some of the legacy lines that maybe weren't as far along, or not maybe weren't as far along?
Yeah, absolutely. I always say I've been with actually Clorox 15 years, Burt's Bees 16 years, because I was at Burt's for about 1 year pre-acquisition. So I have seen I'd say we've built sustainability for Clorox, but we've also borrowed from Clorox. Okay. And in areas of setting public-facing goals across the spectrum of sustainability, from source to disposal, environmental to social. That was a lot of that Burt's was pioneering on, and I think has absolutely influenced Clorox. Getting zero waste to landfill and doing dumpster dives is like a great example of just like a very tangible thing that we were doing back in 2006. And now every one of our global manufacturing facilities will be zero waste to landfill by 2025. So we've kind of taught the company in a few spaces, but where Clorox has, I think, influenced Burt's is in the area of sort of the analytical rigor, the data rigor. Burt's has conducted LCAs more because of the Clorox company than because we felt like we needed to do that for the brand. It was because, all of a sudden we need to be looking at our science-based targets and how is Burt's going to contribute to those. Burt's was always kind of building our innovation and our work based on life cycle principles, but perhaps not getting to the level of detail that Clorox was expecting. So I think there's been a good push-pull on it. And I can say that, a lot of people will ask, has Burt's reduced their standards or lowered their standards? And in fact, I think with some of the greater desire for public commitments and transparency, we've only gotten more natural in our formulations and more sustainable in our packaging.
Oh, great, thank you. So I want to give you guys a chance to sort of, I guess, riff on a specific initiative that you think is really exciting right now, where it is in the company. I know it kind of started with that, but I want to get a little bit more deep dive, if you could, on, what is something that's exciting that you're just embarking on, or you're far enough along to at least talk about, but not sure how it's going to end yet, and why it's exciting to you. Laura, you've got to have something. You're brand new there.
Yeah.
It's all got to be exciting and new, right?
I mean, all of it is exciting and new. Every single piece of it is exciting and new. And on that base, I have two sort of points that I'll call out. One of them is just generally, I think that Orvis is in an incredibly unique spot as a company with these deep roots in conservation, and also recognizing the, responsibility both, internally and externally. And it's unique in that I believe that, Orvis really walks across party lines and has a role to play in there. And so there's a lot in this that, needs to be unpacked in what I'm saying. But I think that there is a real potential for Orvis to lead in the hunt and fish industry, and the hunt and fish industry to lead a conversation and action in a way that has not yet been done, to the point of like sort of breaking out the benchmarking in sectors. I think that this is an area where there is opportunity to bring people together and really try to move the needle in a way that hasn't been done. So that's sort of generally something I'm very excited about. Another one that I would say that I think we could probably all talk for hours on is the importance of collaboration of this work. And there is an organization called the Outdoor Industry Association, and they have established the Climate Action Corps. And the Climate Action Corps is really focused on members being looking at measuring their footprint, identifying reduction opportunities, and continuing to improve year over year, and advocacy along with that. Those are sort of the fundamental pieces of it. And Orvis is a founding member of it, but we've got a lot of work to do there. And so I am looking forward to not only sort of kicking us into gear, but then also really being able to work with the industry. It's just incredible to sort of be able to raise your hand and work with your competitors and say, hey, look, here's a VPPA that we can all align around. And this would be pretty incredible to do when we couldn't do it ourselves, kind of thing. And so I think
is there a lot of knowledge sharing then between the actual competitors, and like how I'm reaching these goals, how you can?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like, hey, what are some packaging goals that Prana has set? Let's talk about those and let's figure out how you've gotten there. It's very open conversations, and there are forums and a board to be able to share all of that. And so I think it's unique, right? It's unique to this work. And obviously, everyone does it in a responsible manner, but I think it's really unique to this work in a way that we can share wins and not be recreating the wheel over and over again.
That's wonderful.
And so I'm excited to lean into that. I think there's some great opportunity there.
Wonderful. Paula, any jump to mind? Something you want to tell us about exciting?
I think the one that I'm really excited about is, and it's a hard one, admittedly, reuse refill models for our industry. Ultimately, if we want to get to net zero, to achieve some of the ambitious plastic and virgin material reduction goals we have, we're going to have to move toward that. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of consumer pull for it yet. So how do we encourage that really challenging behavior change? We'll have to do it through collaboration. And I'm really excited how we're part of the U.S. Plastics Pact. They are sort of an activation arm of some of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation New Plastics Global Economy commitments, and there's an international set of pacts, but it's organizations across the plastics value chain working together against very specific targets and a roadmap. And one of those work streams is refill reuse. So you've got retailers within the pact, you've got manufacturers like us, and we will have to transform categories in order to get the consumers to change the behavior the way we need to. We can't have incrementalism here when you're going to be changing something so dramatically for people in their households.
Right. So I want to follow up on that for just a second. You come from a brand background, right? You're a brand manager before, and so when you think about these refills, and packaging is such a big piece of the way a brand presents itself, and some of the refill, that's a challenge in itself, right? How do you get the brand people on board? How do you work with the collection, all this to make it still reinforce the brand message you want to get across?
Well, I think it's almost like that's the must, is that we can't expect consumers to compromise on how they use. They may need to change behavior, but it can't be considered almost like a trade-off or an inconvenience. So we have to be smarter on our innovation and ensure that we're still delighting our consumers. What I think we'll have to shift, though, is if we do want to transform categories, there will be some level of standardization required. So, for example, if we're moving to spray concentrates, with lifetime bottles in the cleaning category, think of your spray cleaners. It can remove the amount of plastic over the life of a bottle by 90%. But how are you going to get consumers to make that choice, stick with the bottle, have things that fit? It's almost like the technology model, where things need to be able to go from one brand to the other. So there's a level of standardization, but then we also have to figure out, how are we going to differentiate, and where does your brand come through? Is it in the fragrance, the signature fragrance that comes through? Is it in the packaging graphics, or some variation of color or texture? But people love brands, and they love good experiences. So we're going to have to make sure that we don't compromise on that.
Right. No, I just that was something briefly looking at Loop, for example, and seeing the stuff that came in Loop, and you're like, that doesn't look like a Haagen-Dazs container anymore. Right. So how is Haagen-Dazs going to make that work with their model when the container is so distinctive, and if you just go to a regular disposable one? So it's really, I think it's an interesting challenge. Dallas, you're back just in time to tell us about your initiative that's exciting, or scaring, or thrilling, or whatever the right word is.
Thanks for that. Yeah, my dogs are about to get fed and get chirpy.
I've been holding my breath for my Labradoodle not to bark this whole time, so we're doing great.
Right. No, for me, it's the climate story. I mean, it's the biggest one out there, right? And it's the one that, you look across the world today, and there's so many organizations that I applaud them that have made this commitment. I think there's 1,400 that have signed the UN ambition for the 1.5 degree C pledge as of like a couple weeks ago. But you go back a couple years, and it was like a couple dozen. And so this really gets at, a lot of companies are really trying to assess, how are they going to do this? How are they going to tackle this from scope 1 and 2 emission standpoint, which is the thermal and the electric energy that they use within their own four walls. And then scope 3 is this, big beast to tackle, which is everything in your value chain, suppliers and customers. And why I get kind of, excited about this one is because, just going all the way back to my roots with Nalco Water and Ecolab, I was in the field, as a sales engineer and working with universities like Cornell and going in and assessing, the water and the energy usage at your utility plant and looking for ways to optimize those systems, right? And really look at ways to, protect capital assets. And so, we've got 25,000 people out there, boots on the ground every day, helping our customers, do these things. There's digital solutions, there's technologies that can really move the needle when it comes to some of these scope 1 and 2 impacts. And I think that is something that is just, with big challenges, there's big opportunities, right? And I feel really optimistic about the future. I think we're going to, figure some things out in the next 10 years or so, and we're going to have to figure some more things out after that. But that's the one that gets me pretty excited.
That's great. So I know we're actually, surprisingly enough, getting a little bit close to time. And there's a question that came up in the chat, and it's also one that all of my students ask in some version or another, is like, how do I get into sustainability? And one of the things I noticed is all of you come with some strong marketing credentials. Is that, tell I guess if you could walk us through how that background really helps you think about building the case for sustainability in a company, or moving the needle in the company, or just with your work. How does your background help? And what would you recommend to a student who's on the cusp of this but not sure where to go? Paula?
I think that may be a coincidence for this panel. I don't think it's that common, although I think it's increasingly important because sustainability, as Dallas said earlier, it is this wide and it is so complex. And I think the people who can maybe distill it down to what needs action or how to communicate or how to drive that change, marketers are inherently pretty good at that stuff, and collaborators. So I think that's a piece of the puzzle, but I don't think it's necessary. I think the thing that gets me excited these days is when that question comes up, 10 years ago, I had to say, oh, just go into traditional function, operations, finance, marketing, and then build your way in and just make sure you're talking sustainability and learning about it. But now there are entry-level jobs because the data is so critical. The analysis is so important, life cycle analysis basis for things. So I do think it's not just the ivory tower strategy folks anymore. There's lots of opportunities. And I think the cool thing is that so many curriculum at Cornell and others, whether it's in the engineering school or the School of Medicine or business, sustainability is popping up.
I'll try not to be bothered by the ivory tower strategy folks as I sit here. Oh, I don't have my degree behind me, but so one of the things you just came up with a couple of technical skills. Do you think that building those, you mentioned LCA and the engineering side, do you start with that and then learn business and the sustainability part? Do you how important is having that technical capacity when you're working in this space? And any of you can jump in on this one. What do you think about the technical side?
We should let the engineer answer.
Okay.
I mean, that sort of seems like this obvious default, but I'm just gonna keep putting things, tipping them over. To get into sustainability, what you need is passion, and forget about everything else. We've got folks that want to get into sustainability from every function in our organization. We just had to start an employee resource group because it's like the appetite is crazy, and we had 500 people sign up right away, and it's still growing. So sustainability is everybody's role. Everybody can find ways to do it, and it doesn't have to be like, oh, it's just under my title kind of thing. I think if you can find ways to make it inclusive for everybody, you've won.
Great. So you would say the most powerful is when you can just embed it in your role, no matter what that role is. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Well, and that's what we're working toward, right? Like, what's the saying? Like, ideally, 5 years from now, we would have all worked ourselves out of our jobs because sustainability is so embedded in the organization. I think that is where we're headed, that more and more jobs are going to have a sustainability element as part of them versus 10 years ago, where it really was like, you got to start in something else. And then the sustainability person is over here, right? Now we're sort of in the middle where it's like, we've got the sustainability people, but we also have a lot of people out there who have sustainability as a part of their jobs. And so I agree with the idea of developing some expertise, as you would, as someone told me to go learn about economics in undergrad because I was sort of interested in business, right? But developing some expertise to be able to bring to the table, because these sort of strategy jobs are still they're not a ton out there, and there are a whole lot of other options out there right now. And so I really do think that building up some expertise, but also recognizing that there are so many jobs where you can be a differentiator by being someone with a sustainability expertise. So like when we hire someone on our product team, if they're coming in with a sustainability background, they're going to be looked at a lot higher on that resume pile than a lot of other ones will be. And the other thing I will say is I get asked, sort of what do you think is your number one trait that has helped with the sustainability work? And I will say it has been communications, and having that communications background has made a significant difference in terms of understanding how to speak the language, because ultimately we're influencers, right? And we are really trying to help open eyes and convince and rally and motivate. And so being able to understand who's the audience and how can I connect the audience science has made a pretty significant difference, I think, in terms of me being able to help push progress forward.
That's really cool. Thank you. Paula, thoughts on the technical versus just the role of your marketing background in making this work?
I think it going back to say the brand manager piece of marketing, you have the sense of cross-functional collaboration and how to manage those types of projects to conclusion and to the impact you want it. So I think that's where brand management has been really helpful, and it's helped also in terms of like integrating sustainability into other parts of the organization. Now, I've seen the question in chat, what if you have a science or a technical background? How do you get into the sustainability? Is it better to get a certification or a just hands-on experience? I guess I have a bias. I'd be curious, the other panelists, I would love to see hands-on experience in your current job, or get those wins. Show how you can apply that experience, that technical background, because I think that's really important.
And don't feel like you need to have sustainability in the title. Showing those wins doesn't need to be associated with that.
So I have a bias toward getting a certificate, like the certificate you can get from Cornell starting this spring in sustainable business. No, I was told I had to put a plug in somewhere. I think we're just about a minute over. I want to make sure we don't take up any more of your time than we already have, folks. I really appreciate the chance to sit down and talk with you, Laura, to reconnect, and Dallas and Paula to meet you and get a chance to hear about your work. I thank everyone from the Cornell team for putting this on, and from the CBIS team for putting the panel together. And for our audience and the questions, I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them. I tried to work them in as best I could, but there were quite a few coming in. So thank you, and thank you for your efforts, and good luck with all of these amazing initiatives you guys are putting together. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, y'all.